The unyielding defense. The humans died by the billions as the Soran weapons tore their fleets to shreds. The reptilian admirals laughed and mocked the extinction of yet another primitive race from the bridge of the Soran dreadnought. Admiral Vortis, the epitome of cold-blooded ruthlessness, smirked cruelly at the tactical displays, showing the last remnants of the doomed human fleet. The humans scattered in a futile attempt to evade the overwhelming firepower of his ship. Victory and the complete extermination of the human infestation from the galaxy were assured. Vortis savored the impending triumph over an inferior species. He yearned to give the final order that would rain planet-shattering devastation on the human homeworld, ending this tedious campaign. But then, the impossible happened. One of the human ships disappeared from the sensors, right in the heart of the Soran formation. Confusion erupted on the bridge. Surely, it was an equipment malfunction. Humans were far too primitive to possess cloaking technology. But as the bridge crew scoffed at the idea, an uneasy prickling sensation ran down Vortis' scales. Could they have underestimated their seemingly helpless prey? Just as Vortis was about to dismiss the anomaly and pronounce the doom of humanity with a final verdict, alarms shrieked to the life. A midnight black human warship rippled into view at point-blank range, every weapon aimed straight at the Soran flagship. Vortis realized in that instant that he and his entire crew were already dead. The view screen on the Soran bridge crackled to life, revealing a stern human face. The man had close-cropped dark hair and wore a sleek black uniform, a far cry from the utilitarian jumpsuits the Sorans expected of the primitive Terrans. His piercing eyes locked onto Vortis as he spoke. "Admiral Vortis, I am Captain James Scora of the Terran Stealth Frigate Nightshade. Stand down immediately and withdraw your forces. This is your only warning." Vortis sneered, dismissing the human's warning. He turned to his weapons officer, ready to order this impudent Terran blasted out of the stars. But before he could speak, Scora's icy voice cut across the bridge again. "Every ship in your fleet has been locked by a dozen Peacekeeper nuclear missiles. If you do not comply, I will order them fired. You have 10 seconds to make your decision." A beat of stunned silence filled the bridge. Then Vortis threw his head back and roared with laughter. His crew nervously joined in, their hissing chuckles filling the bridge. "You expect me to believe," Vortis managed between guffaws, "that your tiny tub could possibly threaten the pride of the Soran Armada? I've never heard such ludicrous." Scora's expression never wavered. With calm deliberation, he reached forward and tapped a button just out of view. Instantly, the Soran sensors shrieked with urgent warnings. A dozen new contacts blinked into existence, racing towards the dreadnought from all directions. Vortis whipped around to face the tactical display, his eyes widening in shock. Disbelief turned to horror as he watched the missiles streak closer, far faster than any human weapons should move. "Engage point defenses," Vortis roared. "Shoot them down." But it was already too late. The missiles were inside the engagement envelope, moving too swiftly for the Soran CIWS to track. Vortis had only a second to brace himself before the first warhead struck. The dreadnought shuddered like a wounded beast as explosion after explosion rocked its hull. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and crewmen were hurled from their stations. Scora watched the carnage impassively from the Nightshade's bridge, his face illuminated by the flashes of nuclear fire. When the blinding light subsided, the dreadnought groaned like a dying beast, but its powerful shields held. Barely. The same could not be said for its escorts. Several cruisers simply vanished, vaporized instantly by the sudden onslaught. Vortis gripped the arms of his command chair, his claws gouging into the metal. He bared his fangs in a snarl of pure rage as damage reports flooded in. Hull breaches on decks 7, 12, and 15. Primary weapons offline. Engine power fluctuating. A crewman shouted over the chaos, sparks showering from overloaded consoles, and acrid smoke choking the air. Vortis whipped his head back to the view screen where Scora's impassive face still looked out at him. "What trickery is this?" the Sorin admiral roared. "How dare you?" But Skora cut him off, his voice as cold and sharp as a blade. "You have 1 hour to collect your wounded and withdraw from this system," the human captain stated flatly. "Fail to comply, and I will order the rest of our stealth fleet to decloak and open fire. The choice is yours." Then, without another word, Skora reached forward, and the transmission cut out. Vortis was left staring at a blank screen, his jaw hanging open in stunned disbelief. The frantic shouts and orders of his bridge crew barely registered. His mind reeled, trying to comprehend what had just happened. In all the centuries of the Sorin Armada's dominance, no race had ever dared to challenge them so directly, so brazenly. And yet, in the space of a few minutes, this single human ship had done just that. His fists clenched, talons digging into his palms as the impossible choice crystallized before him. Swallow his pride and retreat, leaving the human extermination unfinished, or call the Terran's bluff and risk the destruction of his entire fleet. The hunter becomes the hunted. Captain James Skora stood on the bridge of the Terran stealth frigate Nightshade, his gaze fixed on the view screen displaying the crippled Sorin dreadnought. The reptilian warship hung in space, venting atmosphere from a dozen gaping wounds in its hull, a testament to the devastating effectiveness of the Peacekeeper missiles. Skora watched pensively as the last wisps of gas dissipated into the void, his mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. Around him, the bridge crew of the Nightshade worked with quiet intensity, monitoring their stations and feeding a constant stream of data to the captain. They were all veterans, handpicked for this mission, and they knew the stakes. Every man and woman stood ready to engage the Sorin fleet with everything they had, should the order come. But Skora hesitated. Even with the Nightshade's cutting-edge stealth technology and advanced weapons, a direct confrontation with the Sorins would be costly. The frigate was a prototype, the first of its kind, and though it had already proven its worth, it was not invincible. They had caught the Sorins off guard this time, but the reptilian warriors were nothing if not adaptable. Skora glanced at the countdown display on his chair's armrest. 45 minutes remained until the deadline he had given Admiral Vortis. 45 minutes for the Sorin commander to make a decision that would determine the fate of not just his fleet, but potentially the entire war. Skora had bought time with his bluff about a stealth fleet, but he knew that he might be the only thing standing between the helpless inhabitants of the planet below and total annihilation. The sound of footsteps drew Skora's attention. His executive officer, a grizzled veteran named Harkin, approached and saluted crisply. "Sir, the stealth torpedo launchers are loaded and ready. The fusion cannon is charged and standing by. We can engage on your order." Skora nodded, his expression grim. "Thank you, Commander. Let's hope we don't have to use them." Harkin hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Do you think they'll take the bait, sir? The Sorins aren't known for backing down." "They've never faced anything like us before," Skora replied, his eyes still fixed on the dreadnought. "But you're right. We have to be ready for anything." He turned to the helmsman, a young woman named Tessa Innan. "Begin evasive maneuvers, random pattern delta. We can't let them get a lock on us if this goes south." "Aye, sir." Tessa responded crisply, her fingers already dancing across her console. Next, Skora addressed the communications officer, Lieutenant Mori. "Open a secure channel to TACOM. Apprise them of our situation and request backup if available. Emphasize that we may have started a fight we can't finish alone." "Yes, sir," Mori said, turning to his station. As the crew rushed to carry out his orders, Skora leaned back in his chair, his mind turning over the strange twist of fate that had brought them here. For centuries, humanity had been the prey, hunted and slaughtered by the Sorin Armada. Now, for the first time, the roles were reversed. The hunters had become the hunted, and the Sorins were about to learn the true meaning of fear. A grim smile tugged at the corner of Skora's mouth. There was a certain irony to it all, but he knew that this was just the beginning. Whether Vortis chose to retreat or fight, the Nightshade and her crew would be ready. They had to be, for the sake of every living being in the galaxy. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. And still, the Sorin dreadnought hung silent and unmoving, a wounded beast caught in the sights of a predator it had never known existed. The cost of war. The bridge of the Sorin dreadnought was a scene of chaos. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, and the acrid smell of burnt circuitry filled the air. Crew members rushed to and fro, trying to contain the damage and restore some semblance of order. But despite their best efforts, the situation was grim. Admiral Vortis sat rigid in his command chair, his mind racing. The human captain's ultimatum echoed in his ears, the words cutting through the haze of pain and fury that clouded his thoughts. He had never faced a situation like this before. The Sorin Armada was the most powerful force in the galaxy, feared and respected by all. Yet here he was, outmaneuvered and outgunned by a single human warship. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the fleet," a panicked officer reported, his voice barely concealing his fear. "Put it through," Vortis ordered, struggling to keep his voice steady. The view screen flickered, and the face of Admiral Tarka, commander of the Sorin Fifth Fleet, appeared. Tarka's eyes were wide with shock, his usual arrogance replaced by fear. "Vortis, what in the name of the ancestors is going on? We've lost contact with several of our ships, and our sensors are picking up strange energy signatures all around us. What is this human trickery?" Vortis gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. The humans had them at a disadvantage, but he couldn't afford to show weakness. If he retreated now, the other admirals would see it as a sign of cowardice, and his career, along with his life, would be over. But if he stayed and fought, he risked losing everything. "Admiral Tarka," Vortis began, his voice cold and commanding. "The humans have somehow developed advanced stealth technology and weapons far beyond our expectations. They have threatened to destroy us if we do not withdraw. But we will not be intimidated by their tricks. Prepare your fleet for combat. We will crush these insects and show them what it means to defy the Sorin Armada." Tarka hesitated, clearly uneasy, but he nodded. "Understood, Admiral. We stand ready to engage." The transmission ended, and Vortis turned to his crew. "All remaining ships, prepare for battle. Charge the main cannon and target the human warship. We will annihilate them in one decisive strike." The crew sprang into action, their fear momentarily overridden by the familiar routines of combat. The dreadnought's weapons systems hummed to life, and the massive fusion cannon mounted on its prow began to charge, gathering energy for a devastating shot. But even as the dreadnought prepared to unleash its fury, the Nightshade moved. The human warship slipped through the Sorin fleet like a phantom, evading their sensors with ease. Skora's voice crackled over the open channel, calm and confident. "Admiral Vortis, this is your final warning. Stand down, or we will open fire." Vortis snarled, his anger overcoming his fear. "You don't scare me, human. Fire the cannon." The dreadnought shuddered as the fusion cannon discharged, a blinding beam of energy lancing out toward the Nightshade. But Skora was ready. The human warship rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast, and then counterattacked. Torpedoes streaked from the Nightshade's launchers, targeting the dreadnought's engines. Vortis barely had time to react before the torpedoes struck home. The dreadnought lurched violently as explosions ripped through its stern, sending shockwaves through the entire ship. The power flickered, and the lights dimmed as the engine sputtered and died. For a moment, the bridge was silent, the crew stunned by the sheer ferocity of the attack. Then, as the realization of their impending doom set in, panic erupted. Officers shouted orders, trying to restore power and bring the weapons back online, but it was too late. The Nightshade had already moved in for the kill. Skora's voice came over the comms once more, but this time it was different, softer, almost regretful. "You were given a choice, Admiral. Now you must live with the consequences." With those final words, the Nightshade's fusion cannon fired, a beam of brilliant blue energy that sliced through the dreadnought's already weakened shields. The beam struck the dreadnought's core, igniting a catastrophic chain reaction. The ship's reactor went critical, and the dreadnought was consumed in a massive explosion that tore it apart from the inside. The bridge of the Nightshade was silent as the crew watched the fiery demise of the Sorin flagship. Skora sat motionless in his command chair, his expression unreadable. They had won a great victory, but the cost weighed heavily on him. Thousands of Sorin lives had been lost in an instant, and the repercussions of this battle would be felt across the galaxy. "Captain," Harkin said quietly, breaking the silence, "the Sorin fleet is retreating. We've done it." Skora nodded slowly, but there was no triumph in his eyes. "Set course for the rendezvous point, Commander. Let's get out of here." As the Nightshade slipped back into the shadows, Skora couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Sorins would not forget this defeat, and the war was far from over. But for now, they had bought humanity a reprieve. And that was enough. Shadows of the past. The days following the destruction of the Sorin dreadnought were tense. The Nightshade remained cloaked, moving stealthily through space as it made its way to the rendezvous point with the rest of the Terran fleet. Captain Skora remained on high alert, knowing that the Sorins would be looking for any sign of the human warship that had humiliated them so thoroughly. But as the hours passed without incident, Skora allowed himself a brief moment of respite. He retired to his quarters, hoping to catch a few hours of sleep before the next phase of their mission. But sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the Sorin crew, frozen in their final moments before the dreadnought exploded. He could still hear Vortis' voice, full of anger and defiance, echoing in his mind. Skora knew that the destruction of the dreadnought had been necessary. The Sorins would have shown no mercy if the roles had been reversed, but that didn't make it any easier to accept. He had always prided himself on being a soldier, a protector of humanity. But now, for the first time, he questioned whether he had crossed a line. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from his desk. A message from Admiral Kepler, the overall commander of the Terran fleet. Skora hesitated for a moment before opening the message. "Captain Skora," Kepler's voice came through the speaker. "I've reviewed your report on the battle with the Sorins. You've done an outstanding job, and I have no doubt that your actions have saved countless lives. But I must warn you, this war is far from over. The Sorins will be looking for revenge, and they won't stop until they've wiped us out. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Skora leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as Kepler's words sank in. He knew that the Admiral was right. The Sorins were not a race to forgive or forget, and they would stop at nothing to avenge their defeat. But as he sat there in the silence of his quarters, Skora couldn't help but wonder if there was another way, if there was some path to peace that didn't involve more bloodshed. He had no answers, only questions. But one thing was certain: whatever the future held, Skora and the crew of the Nightshade would face it together. The price of victory. The Terran fleet rendezvoused in the shadow of a massive asteroid, hidden from Sorin sensors by the thick cloud of dust and debris that surrounded it. Captain Skora stood on the bridge of the Nightshade, watching as the other ships arrived one by one. There were only a dozen vessels in total, a pitifully small number compared to the might of the Sorin armada, but each one was a technological marvel, equipped with the latest in stealth and weaponry. Together, they were humanity's last, best hope for survival. Admiral Kepler's flagship, the Resolute, was the last to arrive. The massive battleship slid into position next to the Nightshade, dwarfing the smaller frigate with its sheer size and firepower. Skora felt a flicker of unease as he watched the flagship's gun turrets swivel into position, tracking imaginary targets in the void. The Resolute was a weapon of war, designed for one purpose: to annihilate the enemy. A chime from the comm station signaled an incoming transmission. "Captain Skora." Admiral Kepler's voice crackled over the speakers. "Well done. The destruction of the Sorin dreadnought has dealt a significant blow to their morale, And we've bought ourselves some much-needed time. But we can't afford to rest on our laurels. The Sorens will be regrouping, and we need to be ready to strike before they can launch a counterattack. Understood, Admiral. Skora replied, his voice steady. What's our next move? The Sorens are massing their forces near the Orion cluster, Kepler explained, preparing for a major offensive. Our intelligence suggests that they have a new weapon, something powerful enough to turn the tide of the war in their favor. We need to find out what it is and destroy it before they can deploy it against us. Skora frowned, his mind racing. The Sorens were already formidable enough without some new superweapon. If they managed to deploy it, humanity's chances of survival would drop to near zero. But the idea of launching a preemptive strike didn't sit well with him. He had seen enough death and destruction already. Admiral, with all due respect, is there any way we can try to negotiate with the Sorens? Maybe find a diplomatic solution before this escalates any further. Kepler's response was swift and unequivocal. The time for diplomacy is over, Captain. The Sorens have made it clear that they will not stop until we are wiped out. Our only option is to hit them hard and fast before they can hit us. You have your orders, Captain. Kepler out. The transmission ended, and Skora was left staring at the blank screen, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He had always followed orders without question, but something about this mission didn't sit right with him. The idea of launching a preemptive strike against the Sorens felt wrong, like he was becoming the very thing he had sworn to fight against. But he knew that refusing to follow orders was not an option. The fate of humanity was at stake, and he had a duty to protect it, no matter the cost. Skora turned to his crew, his expression resolute. Prepare the ship for jump. Set course for the Orion cluster. Let's finish this. As the Nightshade's engines powered up, Skora couldn't shake the feeling that he was heading down a dark path, one from which there might be no return. But he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. There would be time for reflection later, if there was a later. The final gambit. The Nightshade emerged from hyperspace on the edge of the Orion cluster, its stealth systems fully engaged. The Soren fleet was exactly where their intelligence had said it would be, clustered around a massive space station that orbited a dying star. The station was a monstrous thing, bristling with weapons and shielded by layers of armor. But it was what lay at the station's core that drew Skora's attention. Captain, I'm detecting a massive energy signature coming from the station, Harkin reported, his voice tense. Whatever it is, it's putting out more power than anything I've ever seen. Skora's jaw tightened as he studied the sensor readouts. The energy signature was off the charts, far beyond anything the Sorens had fielded before. If they managed to deploy this weapon, it could mean the end of the Terran fleet and humanity. We need to take that station out, Skora said, his voice grim. But we can't do it alone. We need to coordinate with the rest of the fleet. Incoming transmission from the Resolute, sir, Harkin announced. Admiral Kepler's face appeared on the view screen, his expression as stern as ever. Captain Skora, our target is the station's core. It's protected by multiple layers of shielding and armor, but our analysis suggests that a focused strike from all our ships might be enough to breach it. We need to hit it with everything we've got, all at once. Skora nodded. Understood, Admiral. We'll take point and draw their fire while the rest of the fleet moves into position. Good luck, Captain, Kepler said. May the ancestors guide your hand. The transmission ended, and Skora turned to his crew. You heard the Admiral. All hands to battle stations. This is it, the final push. The Nightshade surged forward, leading the Terran fleet into the heart of the Soren formation. The enemy ships reacted quickly, moving to intercept, but the Nightshade's advanced stealth systems allowed it to slip past their defenses, weaving through the chaos of battle with uncanny precision. As the Nightshade closed in on the station, the Soren defenses opened up, filling the void with a deadly barrage of energy beams and torpedoes. The Nightshade shields flared as they absorbed the onslaught, but Skora pressed on, determined to see the mission through. All ships, concentrate your fire on the station's core. Skora ordered, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. We need to breach those shields. The Terran fleet responded in unison, unleashing a withering barrage of firepower. The station's shields flared and buckled under the assault, but they held. Barely. Sir, the shields are weakening, but it's not enough. Harkin shouted, his voice strained. Skora gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They needed more firepower, but the fleet was already giving it everything they had. There had to be another way, something they hadn't considered. And then it hit him. The Nightshade's experimental weapon, the one they had used to disable the Sorin dreadnought. It was a risky move, but it might be their only chance. Commander Harkin, prepare to fire the fusion lance. Skora ordered. Harkin's eyes widened. But sir, the weapon's unstable. If it backfires, we don't have a choice. Skora snapped. Do it. Harkin hesitated for a split second, then nodded. Aye, sir. Charging the fusion lance. The Nightshade's power systems groaned under the strain as the fusion lance charged, drawing energy from every available source. The ship shuddered, and alarms blared as the weapon reached critical levels. Fusion lance ready to fire, Harkin reported. Fire, Skora shouted. The Nightshade lurched as the fusion lance discharged, a blinding beam of energy lancing out toward the station. The beam struck the shields with a deafening crack, and for a moment, it seemed as though the weapon would fail. But then, with a sound like shattering glass, the shields collapsed. The fusion lance continued, boring into the station's core and igniting a massive explosion that tore the station apart from the inside. The Sorin fleet was thrown into disarray as the station disintegrated, their formations crumbling in the face of the sudden chaos. The Terran fleet seized the opportunity, pressing the attack and driving the Sorins back. Sir, the station is destroyed. The Sorins are retreating, Harkin reported, his voice filled with awe. Skora slumped back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. They had done it. The station was gone, and with it, the Sorins' superweapon. But the victory came at a high cost. All ships, cease fire, Skora ordered. Let them go. We've won. As the battered Terran fleet began to regroup, Skora allowed himself a moment to breathe. The war was far from over, but today they had won a decisive victory. And for now, that was enough. But as the Nightshade turned away from the battlefield, Skora couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows of this war would haunt him for the rest of his days. The long road home. The journey back to Earth was a somber one. The Terran fleet, though victorious, was battered and bruised. Many ships had been lost in the final battle, and the survivors bore the scars of a hard-fought war. Captain Skora stood on the bridge of the Nightshade, staring out at the stars as the ship made its way through the void. The victory over the Sorins had been costly, and Skora couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. The destruction of the Sorin station had saved humanity from certain annihilation. But at what cost? The loss of life, both human and Sorin, weighed heavily on his conscience. Captain, we're approaching Earth, Harkin reported, breaking the silence. Skora nodded, his gaze still fixed on the stars. Thank you, Commander. Prepare the ship for re-entry. As the Nightshade entered Earth's atmosphere, Skora felt a sense of relief wash over him. They were home, finally. But the relief was tempered by the knowledge that the war was far from over. The Sorins would regroup, and they would come for revenge. But for now, they had bought humanity some time to prepare. The Nightshade touched down on the landing platform, and Skora made his way to the airlock. As the hatch opened, he was greeted by Admiral Kepler and a small group of dignitaries. Kepler's face was stern, but there was a glint of pride in his eyes. Captain Skora, Kepler said, you've done an outstanding job. The destruction of the Sorin station has given us a much-needed advantage in this war. But we cannot afford to be complacent. The Sorins will be back, and we need to be ready. Skora nodded, his expression grim. "I understand, Admiral, but I have to ask, what comes next? We've dealt the Sorens a major blow, but we can't keep fighting like this forever. There has to be another way." Kepler's expression softened slightly. "I wish I had an answer for you, Captain. But for now, we need to focus on rebuilding and preparing for the next battle. The Sorens are relentless, and they won't stop until they've wiped us out. But with people like you leading the charge, I have no doubt that we will prevail." Skora saluted, a sense of duty and resolve filling him. "Thank you, Admiral. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Earth and humanity." As Kepler returned the salute, Skora felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face it. The war was far from over, but as long as there were people willing to fight for humanity's survival, there was hope. And as Captain Skora walked away from the Nightshade, he knew that he would continue to fight, no matter the cost, for the sake of humanity and for the future of all who called Earth home.